The ultimatum that shattered everything. The great assembly hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Elena Rodriguez like a vast amphitheater of judgment. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the curved rows of seats that rose toward the domed ceiling. The air itself seemed heavy with the weight of centuries-old tradition and unquestioned authority. Elena stood at the central podium, her simple black diplomatic suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by the alien delegates surrounding her. At 52, she had served as Earth's primary representative for 8 years, navigating the complex web of galactic politics with patience and skill. Today, that patience would be tested beyond its limits. To her left sat the massive Thornaki delegation, their rocky, mountain-like forms carved from living stone. Their spokesperson, Counselor Vex Thule, regarded her with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. To her right, the graceful Celestians floated in their biomechanical suits, their translucent forms pulsing with soft, blue light. Their leader, High Ethereal Zinmora, had been instrumental in humanity's initial acceptance into the Council 20 years ago. At the apex of the assembly sat Supreme Chancellor Kethvox of the Apex Collective, a being whose species had founded the Galactic Council over 8,000 years ago. His silver skin gleamed under the chamber's lights, and his 6 arms moved in complex patterns as he reviewed the documents before him. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she held the datapad containing humanity's response to the Council's latest decree. Behind her in the small section reserved for human delegates sat General Harrison Blake, Director of Colonial Defense, and Dr. Sarah Kim, Earth's Chief Science Advisor. Their faces reflected the same mixture of disbelief and growing anger that had consumed human leadership for the past month. Chancellor Kethvox's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic system, translated simultaneously into thousands of languages. Ambassador Rodriguez, the Galactic Council awaits humanity's formal response to Resolution 8847, the Stellar Accord for Unified Galactic Education. Elena took a deep breath. The resolution sounded benign enough in its official language, but its true meaning was monstrous. Under the new law, every human colony would be required to surrender 30% of their children between the ages of 6 and 12 to Council education facilities. These children would be raised according to galactic standards, learning to think and act like proper citizens of the greater community rather than clinging to primitive human customs. The Council claimed this was necessary for humanity's advancement. They pointed to similar programs that had successfully civilized dozens of younger species over the millennia. What they refused to acknowledge was that humans were different. The bond between human parents and children was not merely cultural but biological, emotional, and spiritual. To separate families was to destroy the very essence of what made humanity strong. Honored Chancellor, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. The United Colonies of Earth have carefully considered Resolution 8847. We have consulted with our finest minds, our most experienced leaders, and most importantly, with the families who would be affected by this decree. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some delegates shifted in their seats, sensing the tension in Elena's words. We understand the Council's desire to help younger species integrate into galactic society, Elena continued. Humanity has benefited greatly from Council guidance over the past 2 decades. We have learned much about technology, philosophy, and the arts from our elder species. Chancellor Kethvox leaned forward slightly. Then you accept the resolution? Elena's jaw tightened. No, Chancellor, we do not. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and clicking sounds from various species. Never in the Council's 8,000-year history had a member species directly refused a majority-approved resolution. You refuse? Counselor Vex Thule's voice rumbled like an earthquake. Young species, you do not understand the gravity of your words. The Council has guided the development of over 300 civilizations. Our methods are proven. Your attachment to biological offspring is a primitive instinct that must be overcome for true enlightenment. Elena's eyes flashed with fire. Primitive? Counselor Vex Thule, with respect, your species reproduces by splitting off pieces of living rock. You have no concept of what it means to carry a child for 9 months, to feel them grow inside you, to hold them in your arms as they take their first breath. She turned to address the entire assembly, her voice growing stronger with each word. You call our love for our children primitive, but it is the source of our greatest strength. Human parents will work 18-hour days to provide for their families. They will sacrifice their own dreams so their children can have better lives. They will face down armies, cross impossible distances, and overcome any obstacle to protect those they love. High ethereal Zinmora's form pulsed with disapproval. Such emotional attachments lead to irrationality, Ambassador. The Council has observed this in your species repeatedly. Your wars, your conflicts, your inability to think beyond immediate concerns, all stem from these excessive emotional bonds. Excessive? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Our emotional bonds are what drove us to the stars in the first place. When Earth became overcrowded, we didn't fight wars for resources. We found new worlds to settle. When disasters struck our colonies, other human worlds sent aid immediately, without waiting for bureaucratic approval. When the Void Plague threatened to wipe out the Kepler system, human volunteers rushed to help despite the risk to their own lives. Dr. Sarah Kim stood up in the human section. If I may, Chancellor, humanity's emotional bonds have driven scientific breakthroughs that benefit the entire galaxy. Our research into healing technologies stems from our desire to help sick children. Our advances in faster-than-light communication come from families wanting to stay in touch across vast distances. Our innovations in sustainable agriculture feed not just human colonies but dozens of allied worlds. General Blake also rose. And our military effectiveness comes from soldiers who fight not for conquest or glory, but to protect their homes and families. The Council has called upon human forces 17 times in the past decade to help resolve conflicts. We succeeded because our people fight with purpose, not just duty. Chancellor Kethvox raised one of his arms for silence. Emotional speeches aside, the resolution has been passed by a majority vote of the Council. Compliance is not optional. Humanity will surrender the required children for galactic education or face suspension from Council membership and loss of all associated protections and benefits. Elena felt the weight of 8 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders. Council membership provided protection from hostile species, access to advanced technologies, and participation in galactic trade networks. Without it, humanity would be vulnerable to aggression from any species that saw them as a threat or resource to be exploited. But the alternative was unthinkable. Chancellor, Elena said quietly, I need to tell you a story. Last month I visited the colony world of New Hope. It's a small agricultural world, barely 50,000 people. I was there for a routine diplomatic visit, but something happened that changed my perspective forever. The chamber fell silent, sensing the gravity in her tone. A little girl named Lucy Martinez approached me at a public gathering. She was 7 years old with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. She handed me a drawing she had made, a picture of her family standing together under 2 suns. Her parents, her baby brother, her grandparents who had emigrated from Earth to help establish the colony. Elena's voice grew soft but carried to every corner of the chamber. Lucy told me that her grandmother read her stories every night, stories about Earth and the ancestors who came before. Her grandfather taught her to tend the colony's gardens, showing her which plants would grow in the alien soil. Her parents worked in the terraforming stations, slowly making New Hope more like the Earth their children would never see. She paused, letting the image settle in the minds of the assembled delegates. Under your resolution, Lucy would be taken from her family in 4 years. She would never again hear her grandmother's stories or learn from her grandfather's wisdom. She would grow up in a sterile council facility, taught to think of her family bonds as weaknesses to be overcome. She would become efficient, rational, and utterly empty. Elena's voice began to rise, carrying passion and fury in equal measure. You say this is for her own good, that she will be better off learning galactic ways instead of primitive human customs. But you're wrong. Lucy's strength comes from knowing she is loved unconditionally, that her family will always be there for her, that she belongs to something greater than herself. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even the usually restless hive mind clusters had stopped their constant chittering. The drawing Lucy gave me hangs in my office on Earth, Elena continued. Every day I look at it and remember what we're really fighting for. Not territory or resources or political power, but the right of families to love each other, the right of parents to raise their own children, the right of children to grow up knowing where they came from and who they belong to. She turned directly to Chancellor Kethvox. You ask us to sacrifice what makes us human in order to become better galactic citizens, but we believe our humanity is our greatest gift to the galaxy. Take that away, and you'll have a species of efficient, rational beings who have lost their souls. Chancellor Kethvox's silver skin had darkened during Elena's speech. Your emotional attachment blinds you to reason, Ambassador. The resolution stands. Humanity has 30 standard days to begin compliance or face the consequences. Elena looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the eyes of delegates who had worked with humanity for decades. Some showed sympathy, others indifference, many outright hostility. In that moment, she realized that no amount of negotiation or compromise would change their minds. They saw humanity's greatest strength as a flaw to be corrected. Then I'm afraid we have nothing more to discuss, Elena said calmly. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a sealed document, placing it on the podium. This is humanity's formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, some in shock, others in anger. Security forces moved to surround the human delegation, but Elena raised her hand. We will leave peacefully, she announced. But let this be understood by all present. Humanity chooses freedom over security, independence over protection, and family over the false promise of galactic citizenship. She turned to General Blake and Dr. Kim. Shall we go home? The three humans walked through the chaos toward the chamber's exit. Behind them, 8,000 years of galactic tradition trembled on its foundations. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and the greatest gamble in human history. As they reached the massive doors, Elena heard Chancellor Kethvox's voice booming over the noise. You have made a grave mistake, humans. Without the Council's protection, your species will not survive a decade in this galaxy. Elena paused at the threshold and looked back. Chancellor, you've made an even graver mistake. You've underestimated what humans will do to protect their families. The doors closed with a sound like thunder, and humanity was alone among the stars. When humanity chose freedom over security. 6 months had passed since humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse of human civilization. Instead, something far more unsettling was occurring. Human colonies were not just surviving but thriving, while Council enforcement fleets were mysteriously vanishing without a trace. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the exploration, vessel Endeavor, studying the sensor readings that defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. At 35, Marcus had spent his entire adult life exploring the far reaches of space, but nothing had prepared him for what lay before them now. Captain, his science officer Lieutenant Emma Foster called from her station. The energy readings from the planet are unlike anything in our databases. The structures down there are definitely artificial, but they're old. Older than any known civilization in Council records. Through the main view screen, the planet Kepler 442b hung like a blue-green jewel against the backdrop of space. What made it extraordinary wasn't its beauty, but the massive crystalline structures that dotted its surface, each one pulsing with a faint but unmistakable energy signature. How old are we talking about, Lieutenant? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Emma checked her readings again, as if hoping they would somehow change. Based on radioactive decay patterns and stellar drift calculations, I'd estimate these structures are at least 12,000 years old. That predates the formation of the Galactic Council by 4 millennia. Navigator James Park looked up from his console with confusion written across his face. But Captain, that's impossible. Council historical records show that this sector was uninhabited until the Zelani expansion 3,000 years ago. They've maintained that no intelligent species existed in this region before then. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. For the past 6 months, human exploration vessels had been pushing into regions of space previously forbidden by Council law. What they were discovering challenged everything they had been taught about galactic history. "Take us into orbit," Marcus ordered. "Full sensor sweep. I want to know everything about those structures." As the Endeavour descended toward the planet, Communications Officer Lisa Rodriguez received an encrypted message from Earth. Her face paled as she read the contents. "Captain, priority message from Colonial Command. It's marked urgent and eyes only." Marcus accepted the message tablet and read quickly. His expression grew grimmer with each line. "What is it, sir?" Lieutenant Foster asked. Marcus looked up at his crew, 5 of the brightest young officers in the colonial fleet, all of whom had volunteered for deep space exploration, despite the dangers posed by their species' expulsion from the Council. 3. More Council enforcement fleets have gone missing, he announced. That brings the total to 15 fleets in 6 months. Over 200 ships and their crews have simply vanished without sending distress calls or leaving wreckage. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. The Council had been sending enforcement missions to pressure human colonies into compliance with their ultimatum. These weren't diplomatic vessels, but heavily armed battle fleets designed to force humanity back into submission. "Any idea what happened to them?" James asked quietly. Marcus shook his head. "That's the strange part. According to the reports, each fleet was investigating disturbances in space. Energy anomalies, gravitational fluctuations, unexplained sensor readings. They would report finding something unusual, and then all communication would cease." "Emma," Foster's voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain, are we looking at one of those anomalies right now?" Before Marcus could answer, the ship's sensors began registering something impossible. The crystalline structures on the planet's surface were responding to their presence, their energy output increasing dramatically. "All stop," Marcus ordered. "Shields up, weapons to ready status." But instead of attacking, the structures seemed to be sending out some kind of signal. The ship's universal translator struggled to process it before finally providing a partial conversion. "Welcome home," the message repeated in broken Federation standard. "Children of the first return." Lieutenant Foster stared at her readings in disbelief. "Captain, the signal is specifically directed at us. It's reading our DNA patterns through the hull scanners and responding to our genetic markers." "That's impossible," James protested. "Humans have only been in space for 300 years. We couldn't have been here 12,000 years ago." Marcus felt something stirring in the back of his mind, like a memory that didn't belong to him. Images flashed through his consciousness, vast ships sailing between the stars, colonies established on countless worlds, a great civilization that spanned the galaxy. "Take us down," he ordered, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Landing coordinates near the largest structure." "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" Emma asked. "We don't know what's down there." Marcus smiled, and for a moment his officers could have sworn they saw an ancient knowledge reflected in his eyes. "We're about to find out who we really are." The landing was smooth, and as soon as the Endeavour touched down, the crystalline structures began to resonate with a deep, harmonic sound that seemed to penetrate directly into the crew's minds. One by one, each human on the ship began to experience flashes of memory. Not their own memories, but the genetic memories passed down through countless generations. They saw humanity as it had been 12,000 years ago, not a young species, stumbling toward the stars, but an ancient civilization that had once ruled a third of the galaxy. They saw the great libraries of Altara Prime, the shipyards of Beta Centauri, the research stations that had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel millennia before any Council species achieved spaceflight. And they saw the war that had ended it all. Captain Chen found himself standing before the largest crystalline structure without remembering the walk from the ship. As he approached, a section of the crystal became transparent, revealing a chamber filled with soft light and floating displays showing star charts of the galaxy as it had been eons ago. A voice spoke directly into his mind, not through the universal translator but in concepts that bypassed language entirely. You are the descendants of the first civilization, the voice explained. When the Great War threatened to destroy all life in the galaxy, your ancestors chose exile over annihilation. They scattered across the outer rim, erasing their history and suppressing their technology so that future generations might have a chance to start fresh. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he understood. The Council. They knew, didn't they? The species that would become the Council were primitive when your people ruled. They scavenged the ruins of your civilization, built their technology on the foundations of your ancestors' knowledge. When humans began returning to space, they recognized the genetic markers but could not allow the truth to be known. The crystalline. Chambers showed him images of Council archaeological teams finding ancient human ruins throughout the galaxy, systematically destroying evidence and rewriting historical records. The great libraries of a dozen worlds, all containing proof of humanity's true heritage, had been reduced to ash to maintain the lie. The enforcement fleets, Marcus whispered. What happened to them? The galaxy remembers its children, the voice replied. Ancient defense systems dormant for millennia have begun awakening. They recognize Council species as invaders and humans as the rightful inheritors. The fleets were not destroyed. They were relocated to empty sectors of space, their crews unharmed but their weapons disabled. As Marcus absorbed this information, similar awakenings were occurring across human space. On the research station Prometheus, Dr. Nina Ashworth watched in amazement as her team's experimental faster-than-light communication system suddenly began operating at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. The principles they had been struggling to understand for years became crystal clear as genetic memories surfaced. On the industrial world of New Manchester, engineer David Thompson felt his hands moving with practiced expertise as he modified manufacturing systems to produce materials that existed nowhere in Council databases. The techniques came to him as naturally as breathing, passed down through generations of dormant genetic programming. Most remarkably, on the agricultural colony of Haven, 8-year-old Sarah Kim began drawing star charts that showed the locations of ancient human installations throughout the galaxy. When her parents asked how she knew these places, she simply said, "I remember." The awakening was not violent or dramatic. It was gentle, like a parent's hand guiding a child's first steps. Across dozens of worlds, humans began remembering who they were and what they were capable of. Technologies thought lost forever began functioning again. Skills that had taken other species millennia to develop came naturally to human hands. On Earth, President Maria Santos stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by advisors and military leaders, as reports flooded in from across human space. Every colony was reporting the same phenomenon. Their people were changing, becoming more than they had been. Madam President, General Harrison Blake announced, our deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the galaxy. It's as if ancient systems are coming online after being dormant for thousands of years. President Santos nodded grimly. What's the Council's response? Panic, Blake replied. Their enforcement fleets are afraid to enter human space. 3 of their member species have formally requested emergency sessions to discuss the human situation. Chancellor Keth Vox has declared humanity a threat to galactic stability. Dr. Sarah Kim entered the room carrying a data pad filled with the latest reports from exploration vessels. Madam President, Captain Chen's team on Kepler 442b has made contact with an artificial intelligence system left by our ancestors. It's confirmed what we've suspected. Humanity didn't originate on Earth. We're descendants of refugees from a galactic civilization that existed long before the Council. The President absorbed this information with remarkable calm. Perhaps the awakening genetic memories were affecting her as well. What does this mean for our future? It means, Dr. Kim said with a smile, that we're not the young species the Council thought they could manipulate. We're the descendants of the galaxy's first great civilization, and we're coming home. In the depths of space, the ancient network of human installations continued to awaken. Automated systems began repairing themselves, preparing for the return of their creators' children. Defense platforms that had guarded the galaxy's core worlds for millennia powered up their weapons arrays. Research stations containing technologies beyond the Council's understanding began broadcasting their locations to human vessels. And in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, Chancellor Keth Fox stared at reports that painted a picture of a galaxy transforming beyond recognition. The young species he had dismissed so contemptuously 6 months ago were revealing themselves to be something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. How long, he asked his advisors, before they realized their full potential? The answer came from his intelligence chief, a Vortani whose crystalline form was dimmed with fear. Based on the rate of technological awakening, perhaps months, maybe weeks. Keth Fox's 6 arms trembled as he contemplated the magnitude of his mistake. In trying to break humanity's spirit, he had awakened something that had slept for 12,000 years. The galaxy's rightful heirs were reclaiming their inheritance, and there was nothing the Council could do to stop them. The day mankind departed the Galactic Council had indeed been the day the universe changed forever, not because humanity had fallen, but because they had finally remembered how to rise.